How did General Sir Isaac Brock and Shawnee War Chief Tecumseh seize one of the strongest American forts in the War of 1812 without even firing a shot? TikTok Trevor here, time for your daily history update, and this one will be a multi-parter. When the War of 1812 broke out, Brock found himself in a very unenviable position. With barely 1,000 British regulars, he had to defend a front that extended more than 1,600 kilometers from Windsor in Ontario all the way to the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. There was no way he could defend against the dozens of places the Americans could launch an assault into British North America. So Brock did the only thing he thought was logical. He went on the offensive. He decided, if I can determine where the battlefield is, I can dictate where the battle takes place and put the Americans on the defensive rather than on the offensive. So the logical place for him to attack would be across the Niagara Peninsula into upper New York. But that's where most of the American forces had gathered. Instead, Brock decided to move the bulk of his forces from Niagara on the Lake to attack Fort Detroit, 300 kilometers to the west, the strongest American fort on the American frontier. Doing this did two things. One, it put the Americans on the defensive, because in a war that they had initiated, suddenly in the very first battle, they find themselves under attack rather than attacking. Secondly, it made the American government pause. If Brock could attack a fort 300 kilometers to the west of his main base, how many British troops were actually in British North America? They didn't know, and that uncertainty is possibly what saved Canada in the entire war. Now, on his way to Fort Detroit, Brock attacked Amherstburg and destroyed the American forces there, and that's when he first met the Shawnee War Chief Tecumseh. Now, Tecumseh had long been an advocate of working with the British over the Americans in his hopes of creating, after the War of 1812, an independent indigenous state. Brock and Tecumseh soon found themselves with kindred spirits, and both realized that in each other was an ambitious, courageous, daring warlord that could possibly turn the tide of the war in Canada's favor. The two of them sat down and put their heads together and began to plan the attack on this most daunting of targets, Fort Detroit. While they were doing that planning, though, a document would fall into their hands that would change the course of their plans and possibly change the course of Canadian history forever. Wait for part 2 to find out what that was. Consider yourself updated.